Jai Hind and welcome to Death Talks. The Gogra disengagement came in recently after the 12th Corps Commander talks. I have with me Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, who was there with us last time as well, to talk to us about the situation on the LAC. General Kulkarni was commissioned into the 4th Command in 1977, and after an illustrious career of 39 years in the Indian Army, where he had the opportunity to serve all across this wide country. He also participated in Operation Polar Bear and Operation Meghdoot in 1983 and 84. For his unfurling of the national flag on Bilafondla, he was awarded the Shaurya Chakra. He's got a lot of experience dealing with the Chinese in the line of control, and one of the reasons I wanted to catch up with him to understand what is happening in that region. Sir, thank you so much for joining me once again to share your views about what is the update on the line of control, sir.
Aadi, just as a prelude, you would have realized that after our foreign minister and the Chinese foreign minister spoke on the 14th of July at Dushanbe, and after the 22nd meeting of the WMCC, on the 25th of June, that paved the way for the Corps Commander level talks. That is the 12th round of the Corps Commander level talks. And that is what has finally led to this disengagement at Gogra, which is supposedly Petrol Point 17 Alpha, wherein they have now restored as what it was in April 2020. So to be able to say with certainty that yes, status quo ante has been restored, at least as on ground is concerned. Now there's various modalities that whether buffer zone has been created, that there would not be any interaction between the troops, as it was almost an eyeball to eyeball, where the distances may be between 2 kilometers and 3 kilometers, so that there is no confrontation, and nothing that ever happened at Galwan should happen between two countries which are civilized countries. And then for Chinese to take on, weapons of the 18th century and come with all those kinds of barbed wires and baseball bats, wrapped up knuckles, iron nails, and all those kind of things, I think it speaks very, very poor that this kind of a situation should even exist along the LAC, primarily when agreements between the two nations are there. You have the 1993, the 1996, and all these protocols for peace and tranquility. And despite that, well, to be taking, solace that, well, not a shot was fired, but lives were lost. And that is what is bad. And that should be totally avoided. Hopefully, after what happened on the north and the south banks of Pangong Tso in Feb of 2021, after the 9th round of talk, to what now has taken place on the 12th round of talks on the 4th and the 5th of August, hopefully, I think, as I again and again reiterate, I feel that the Chinese must disengage. The disengagement would lead to de-escalation. The de-escalation then will lead to peace and tranquility. And the government of India has made it very, very clear that until and unless there is a peaceful border that exists between the two countries, relations between the two nations cannot go further and cannot progress, and neither would be good. Because that's almost like a precondition that should the two countries have good relations, and for which the first condition is peace and tranquility along the LAC. And hopefully, these are step-by-step incremental progress will take place. There will be talks. There will, because now we have other friction points, and primarily the hot spring is yet another friction point which needs to be resolved, followed thereafter by Depsang. If anything has happened along, say, Demchok or wherever things exist, those things, friction points have to be resolved. So until and unless all friction points, the thing is resolved, it would be futile whatsoever, because to have 4 friction points resolved and 4 friction points continuing with that kind of a tension is not worth it. If you have to be resolving it, it is all along the LAC. That is what would pave the way for good relations between the two neighbors, and neighbors who are old civilizations. You can't change your neighbors, and the neighbors would remain neighbors only. And good relations would lead to prosperity, would lead to peace and tranquility, not just along the LAC, but in South Asia and entire Asia. where I think all these kind of friction is primarily because the Chinese want to dominate and don't want to see anybody competing with them or even being anywhere close to them. And they fear that it's only India as a nation which has at one time when they had almost 27% of the world's GDP, India also had no less than 18 to 19% of the GDP. So you saw that the kind of I would say competition between the two nations have been in existence for the last about 400 years. So now people call it the Asian century. Who in Asia would be there in the Asian century? China and India. But if the Chinese think that only they alone would want to be part, it's not possible. And therefore, it is better that we both nations cooperate, coexist, adjust, adapt, and allow each other to grow rather than be in kind of this kind of a disharmony and absolutely visible the expansionist ideology and wanting to say that we are the center of universe and that we alone are what we are and that we would not let anybody come. I think that's that is not what the world looks at it. And I'm sure, Aadi, you realize it that today the democracies the world over have all got together to be able to oppose such an ideology of expansionism, of wanting to exert, or what some might call it the war for diplomacy, some would call, a kind of just because you have deep pockets, you have the debt diplomacy, and insisting like some of the countries have almost lost their sovereignty in a manner that they wouldn't want to say, but they virtually become suzerain to China. But slowly and steadily, you start giving away your land, start giving away your own areas on lease, and then slowly and steadily give away your fishing rights, slowly and steadily give away your, those certain port facilities for good to another nation. That's indicative that that is what Chinese want. Chinese want that they are sovereign, rest all are suzerain to them. Hopefully, things will improve. That's how I see things will improve. There's a good hope and good start after February 2021. Now, in August 2021, it would be premature on my part to say it will happen in the next meeting. No, it may take a few rounds of discussions and talks, which will help us further to resolve disputes from other friction points. And as I said, the friction points are hot spring, that's which needs to be resolved, and Depsang positively needs to be resolved. Yeah, Aadi.
So the last time when the Chinese went back from their positions, or the last time that we had disengagement was because we were commanding a certain height and we had a certain advantage over them. A lot of people are now asking what was the advantage that we had over the Chinese in Gogra that they're going back, and do we need to follow this strategy in other friction points as well? That's part one of my questions. And part two is, if we didn't have an advantage of any kind, what would be the motivation for the Chinese to come back? Because we do see, as you yourself said, a big gap between two meetings that took place. So how do you look at this?
See what happened during the February 2021 disengagement at Pangong Tso, wherein we also came down from the Kailash ranges and they also pulled back from finger 4 to finger 8, resulting in we remaining at where we were in the Thansing Thapa camp, and they are at finger 8 and beyond towards their side. So there's a long buffer which has been created between the two sides, wherein now there is no patrolling. Earlier, at least we were patrolling up to finger 8, and they were also coming to finger 4. So, and that is what led to this kind of a situation, despite various agreements in place, because sometimes on ground, all kinds of people are there, and you just tell somebody that, look, please move back. He doesn't move back. He comes close to you, and it involves in fist fights or boxing or pushing and all that kind of thing, which is avoidable. And now with this kind of agreement in place, well, that is what has been avoided, reducing the tension. But that was at Pangong Tso. Now coming to the Gogra. Now even around the same period of time when all other friction points also the disengagements were to take place, the disengagements at Hot Spring and Gogra did not take place as desired. Or at Galwan, Galwan, yes, the disengagement because of that incident that occurred over there, the disengagement did take place. But at Gogra and Hot Spring, which should have happened at that point of time, the Chinese did do some kind of, I would say, uh, you know, small reduction of troops or thing like that. But that is not disengagement. So that those friction points remain a cause of concern. So the Chinese themselves now at this point of time, I think there are various things. First, of course, as I said, the two foreign ministers and our own foreign minister has a long, sort of history of actually interacting with the Chinese, being an ambassador there, has been on a very good relationship with Mr. Wang, who's their foreign minister. So there's a good rapport and understanding between the two foreign ministers are concerned. And then after that, of course, the WNCC meet that has taken place, that also has been the 22nd round. So there's been rounds and rounds and rounds of meeting, but nothing very substantial occurring. And above all, at this point of time, when China would be feeling the heat of the international pressure. And that international pressure at this point of time is that the democracies have got together. The Chinese feel that the Quad seems to be now taking some shape. Now you find UK, which is not part of the Quad, has also entered South China Sea with their aircraft carrier. The Japanese are also not liking the way they are coming onto the East China Sea. There's the tension which is prevailing in Taiwan. You find that the Americans have been insisting again and again that there should be freedom of navigation, and that the law of the sea must prevail. Nobody must be allowed to be able to prevent anybody from using international waters. So that is one pressure which has led now to the Chinese not being able to make the same impact on their. After all, they may be trading with 110 countries, but those 100 countries may be just giving them $4 billion. And 4 countries may be giving them $600 billion of trade. So the countries which almost gave them trade are the countries now standing to say that, look, you're wrong. And whether it be USA, whether it be Japan, and Australia, India, all of these countries are big markets also. As a result of which, the Chinese probably would have seemed to realize that over a period of time, if this kind of a tension and confrontation carries on, the trade is going to be affected. And if the Chinese feel that they are the manufacturers of the world and that they were holding it to themselves and having lost so much of the market, well, that's a very big difference that it is going to make, because Xi Jinping has stated to his people that at 2050, when their nation celebrates 100 years of their communist rule, and from 1949 to 2049, they would be seeing a very prosperous China, a China which would be different, a Chinese which would be competing with Americans, a Chinese would have an excellent standard of living, and it would be the center of the universe, something which. So there have been dreams and hopes being given, and suddenly you find that there are ripples now. Unemployment would have taken place because you manufacture things for somebody to buy them. But if the countries are not going to buy them, then you are finding that over there also there will be hardships being faced. Plus at the same time, COVID has brought it to a place where they themselves now at this point of time seem to be suffering. Now the Wuhan province itself seems to have been kept under a lockdown, and a lot of things are happening around there. So the Chinese, not just the world over, they themselves in their own country seems to be on the back foot. And at this point of time, when Afghanistan is now playing a big role, because Afghanistan, where the Chinese seem to be feeling that the Americans having left Afghanistan has put pressure on China. Because all said and done, now the Afghan Pashtuns and the Pathans, they can't be controlled so easily because they don't follow system. There is a Pashtun wali, they follow their own system. Much that their own mullah brother went and had a talk with Wang, their foreign minister. Imagine a man who's been in custody of Pakistan for years on, now represents Taliban, and a man who stands next to the foreign minister, and so he has a backyard. The Chinese have a backyard in Xinjiang, where they feel that the extremist organizations from there, once Afghanistan gets loose, they will not know what is happening in the background. Plus the Wakhan corridor, which is just about 47 kilometers from Xinjiang province. So Chinese are somehow feeling the heat, that heat in South China Sea, heat in Taiwan, heat in Hong Kong, heat from Japan, heat in the trade market. India is not budging whatsoever. The mirror deployment exists. So all this would have led to China feeling that it is better there. A bit of, give and take would help. And in this give and take, after all, what is the give and take? We are not going to go for patrolling. They are not going to come for patrolling. So there's almost like a buffer zone between the two nations, which is created. So that buffer, it's what has led to a disengagement or maybe lessening of the tension. But that should occur all across. Hopefully, China would have realized that good relations help them. And if international, today, if you are not going the way the international community expects you to move, then you are seen in bad light. The Chinese citizens in other countries also don't seem to be feeling free and good in nations which they like to visit, and they find that their own nationals are not comfortable, the tourism is not taking place, so many things are occurring. It is better than to be good to the nations, and why not resolve? If this is resolved, like the Pakistanis said, no, the ceasefire will be respected. Why did they say so? Because they wanted to tackle Afghanistan. Because if they felt that if this was there and if Indians were to retaliate, the Pakistanis would have been on the totally back foot. They wouldn't know what is hitting them and from where. So they best thought, let's shake hands at this point of time over here so that they can focus themselves in Afghanistan, knowing fully well that Americans are going to pull out and they wish to now have a protectorate of Afghanistan as part of Pakistan. So they must be having their way of looking at things and the way it is. But everybody, has their way because Taliban is after all their creation, and they know that if Taliban, if Pakistan wants a say in Kabul, the Pashtuns also want a say in Islamabad. So it's a mutual give and take. Let's see how it happens in the long run. So there are a lot of things which are happening at the same time. But I would say in our context, maybe that because of what had happened in February 2021 and probably nothing happening, and the 11th round of talks, some sentiments being expressed by the Chinese to say, well, you should be happy with what you have got. That is an indication. These kind of sentiments coming from their side, then you can say, okay, then mirror deployment continues and so be it. You do what you want to do, we'll do what we are going to be doing. So this kind of a relationship doesn't last long. It is better than to be, after all, along the LAC. We need to be alert. All said and done, it cannot be the same. This thing, we have got to be alert. We must be vigilant. We must keep our powder dry. We mustn't do anything which is wrong. We must follow international norms and international system. And I think the Chinese can be told very clearly, you have to look into their eye and be able to deal with them from a position of strength. Yeah.
So last question, and of course this is going to be ringing in a lot of people's mind. How do we resolve Depsang? Do you think the Chinese would ever give way? I mean, they've been sitting there for quite a long time, and they've been successful enough of, separating these two standoffs by, whatever way they've had to, but they've made sure to say that, this is the new standoff and that is the old standoff. Let's finish the new one and then we'll go back to that whole thing. And I don't know if it's right or wrong, but this is just my observation. What do you think is going to happen in that case? Would we ever be able to come to a point where things would be, back to what they were somewhere in 2012? I say this because that strategically is pretty critical, and they're pretty close to some of our very, very important assets. So how do you, see that progressing?
See, what happens is Petrol Point 10, 11, 11 Alpha, 12, 13, all these which are at Depsang, it is not a difficult thing to resolve because Depsang are plains. You can see for miles. You don't really need to come and sit anywhere. You can watch from miles what it is. And they can watch from miles and we can watch from miles. That is why it is called Depsang Plains. It is a high altitude plain desert. So there's nothing that is can be hidden. So I think it would be in the interest of the Chinese that they have their observation post, they watch us. We have observation posts, we watch them. So, and it's been going there earlier. And not that we can't do it, only thing it would further be a hindrance. In fact, a degree of difficulty to be able to approach may a little more. But why? When I would look at it this way, then if it has occurred in around 2013 during the visit of their Prime Minister Lee, and 2014, all these other issues of them Schumer occurred when Xi was to come, and then Doklam, and then during the Prime Minister Modi's visit to China, when yet another incident at Schumer occurred. So you find that these kind of occurrences which have been happening over the years as a routine can be resolved. It is nothing which is which cannot be resolved by talks. And at this point of time, for so many years, it was there. Where is the problem? If you were to go through, what are petrol points? Petrol points are nothing but designated areas which are along the LAC where you go up to and be able to just go up to your area. They're not getting into their area. And they also know that this is the area which the Indians are coming up to and an area that they come to. I think the Chinese should, I think, accept that, well, it's not worth it. And if they want to resolve issues and not unnecessarily insist on coercion, because, the Chinese believe that in what they call the Sun Tzu's dictum of that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without a fight. So they would do all these kind of things, put pressure, build all this kind of coercion measures that no, and then over a period of time, the occupation becomes your residence. So that is what it is. 9 out of 10, whoever is the occupant becomes the owner. So that is the system that they seem to do. What most of us call it is salami slicing. Slowly and steadily start creeping in, and I think it will not work. And it should not work. And it would be in their interest that then it's a plain, as I said, Depsang plain you can see from your observation post, we can see from our observation post. So there is no need for anybody to step in and put a tent and say, no, we are not going to let you go that side. So your vehicles move back. And this, I think, is not desirable in my view, not acceptable. And if they want no tension along the LAC, if they want peace and tranquility along the LAC, all friction points would have to be resolved. Only then, as the government of India has been saying again and again, that there can be good relations, or we can afford to talk on matters other than LAC, if only the LAC has peace and tranquility all along it.
Yeah, I think that message has gone through pretty clearly to the Chinese. What they do about it is a totally different story, but I'm sure they've got the message. And as the general has brought out pretty clearly, that this time, I think India, and as a matter of fact, not I think, it is the reality that India is not going to budge. It may be so that the dropping of trade, I mean, things did go up last year, so a lot of people would put that as an argument that last year trade with India and China went up. Well, that was because of a certain reason. If you do a little research into what the trade was, you'll find out that most of it was medical equipment, which was required at that particular point of time. So that's fine. That's okay. As a matter of fact, it was in our national interest to get whatever we needed to from China. And there is nothing wrong in securing our national interest, even if it is whoever it is. And of course, the general has also brought out a very interesting thing, sir. And, you've actually mentioned that the Chinese are now starting to feel the heat. And I think it's a to beat the Chinese, one thing that comes out of your talk is not going to be just on the LAC. It has to be all around them. It has to be military. It has to be diplomatic. It has to be economic. It has to be intrusion into what they call their territories. South China Sea, I believe there's a 4-ship group that has entered there, of the Indian Navy. So I think there's a lot of pressure that has been put onto China by our community, and I will call the diplomacy, the military as a community as a whole, to put that message across, as Sir was mentioning, that we will not normalize relations till the time the line of actual control is back to where it is peaceful. It is not eyeball to eyeball. Sir, thank you so much for bringing that out and actually sharing your thought process in this entire thing. And it is going to take time. It's not something which is going to be very, very fast. And as you mentioned last time that we spoke as well, things are not going to be fast. It's going to be slow and steady, because I personally feel, not as a military, this thing, as just somebody who learns this entire thing, is that if the Chinese just walk away from there, well, they're going to lose a lot of face. So they're not wanting to do that. I mean, it's an ego tussle between two big bullies.
Absolutely.
One bully and a bear, So
they also their national interests, and what do they tell their own people? Why did they do what they were to pull out the way they've done? So they have negotiations to say, well, Sundarang Chu took almost a decade. and it happened overnight. So that took a decade to be able to resolve it, in the sense of, well, they are there at Sundarongchu, just below our post, but then they're there. They haven't pulled back. They have not gone back like that. But yes, nothing much, and that's all. They're seated over there. So all these issues would take time, and it's very important, realize it. If you see Tibet, you see Xinjiang, you see Yunnan, and you see South China Sea, and you see the whole of China. The South China Sea itself is about 3.5 million square kilometers. You find Xinjiang, another 1.6 million square kilometers. You see Tibet, 1.2 million square kilometers. You see Inner Mongolia, 1.1 million square kilometers. Just see the kind of area which is surrounding the mainland China, which is consisting of Han population. So the Han population is all along the eastern coast, surrounded by Xinjiang, Tibet, Mongolia, and of course the South China Sea. So they have sort of created an empire of theirs with buffers of their own surrounding them, who are not Hans. The Xinjiangs are the Uyghur. You have Tibetans, you have Mongolians, you have the South China Sea, which has its own Vietnam is contesting it, Philippines contesting it. You find Vietnam contesting it, you have Brunei contesting it, everyone's contesting that. So there's a lot of mix. But the Han population of theirs, which is being surrounded by this, is to ensure protection to those 95% of the population by them. What do you think is the per square kilometer density of Tibet? 3. There are just 3 men per kilometer, and just about 20 men per kilometer in Xinjiang. Just that is the kind of density of population, which otherwise people would have 300 and 600 and sometimes 1,000 people per square kilometer. Here is just 3. And what is the investment by the Chinese into the 3 per square kilometer? Trillions of dollars. Trillions of dollars over the years. Lovely railway line, electrical line, bullet trains, all these kind of things. For whom? I'm sure they're not going to be benefiting the Tibetans over there. It is for their own for their own mobilization, for their own logistics, for their own tourism, everything for themselves. But under the garb of tourism, under the garb of wanting to help the Tibetans and wanting to enroll Tibetans into the PLA, wanting them to be eyes and ears of the PLA, all this is in the garb. It's all duplicity. But the basic aim is to be able to mobilize as quick as they can opposite the Indian territory, and to further strengthen what they call it as the Western theater.
Creation of buffers. So that is a very interesting thought process, and I'd lead you on to this for another talk someday, because you've just given me a thought. Has China occupied Tibet to create a buffer against India? Has China occupied Xinjiang to create a buffer against Russia? And is China trying to push back in the South China Sea to create a buffer from the United States? That's a thought which needs a little research. Sir, thank you so much for lighting up a lot of fires in my head for me to start reading around the place. It's going to be an interesting next couple of days to find out the history behind and the statements that were given by the Chinese at that time. Thank you so much once again for joining me, sir.
Pleasure. Jai Hind.